My father was born in Monterrey, Mexico, and immigrated to the U.S. during the Mexican Revolution. He was a legal resident alien and carried a green card every day of his life. My mother was born in Harlingen, Texas, where the Mexican children attended a segregated school and could swim in the public pool only one day a year. The next day, the pool was drained and cleaned. My parents came of age in the Rio Grande Valley during the Great Depression, a time when a college education was out of reach for most, and certainly for them. And although both had excelled while in high school, my mother even being named salutatorian of her graduating class, neither was able to attend college. Their unfulfilled dreams for a college education fueled their desire to make sure that my brothers and I got ours. Every month, my parents placed $5 into savings accounts designed for one purpose: to fund our college education. It was not because they had a lot of money, quite the contrary. My father's first job was as a janitor, although he eventually worked his way up to manage the same office where he had once emptied trash cans. Our mother died at the very young age of 40. I was 9, my brothers were 11 and 5. My father raised my brothers and me pretty much alone. One evening after our mother had died, I remember my father sitting down at my mother's sewing machine. At first he just stared at it. Then he called for me and asked that I help him thread the needle so he could mend something. After our mother's death, jobs in our home were not gendered. We all took turns doing whatever needed to be done. And expectations were not gendered either. All three of us were expected to go to college and succeed. One day our father sat the three of us down and told us that we had survived the most difficult thing for a child, the loss of our mother. He proclaimed, as if anointing us with a sacred power, nothing that will ever happen in your life from now on will be worse than what you have already survived. You are the stronger for it. I wasn't exactly sure what he meant by that. It wasn't until much later, as life's challenges presented themselves one by one, that I came to understand the power and strength that he had given us with those sacred words. After completing my freshman year at our local community college, I married at age 19 and moved to Houston so my husband could get a job while I went to the University of Houston. I finished my bachelor's degree, and a few months after graduation, we had our first baby. I had applied to start graduate school at the urging of my husband. He said, "We're already here in Houston, we're used to being poor, and college seems easy for you." So almost as a lark, I applied for a graduate program in classical rhetoric and public address. I had been an English major, I had debated in college, and loved the idea of studying classical rhetoric. To my great surprise, I was accepted for the fall semester. I was the only Latina or Latino in the master's program. And then, much to my surprise, I found out I was pregnant again. So now I had a 4-month-old, I was starting graduate school, and I was expecting our second baby. My husband would work a shift that would allow him to take care of the baby when I went to class in the morning. I would race home after class and he would go to work from 3 to 11. The next day, we would repeat the drill. Miraculously, it worked. Some weeks were better than others, but 2 years later, we had 2 babies. I had completed my master's degree and we were on our way back home to Brownsville. We bought a small house and settled in. I taught at the community college where I had begun my own college education just a few years earlier. I was now 23 and began teaching students that were often older than I was. My best students were Vietnam veterans that I had gone to high school with. They had come to know firsthand the suffering of a dreadful war and felt privileged to have returned and now be in college. You've heard that we learn more than we teach from our students. I learned humility and honor from them. After teaching for about 2 years, I ached for more. One day, on an old-fashioned bulletin board in the faculty study, I read an announcement about a Ford Foundation fellowship that would fund my entire doctoral studies if I could get it. I remember telling my husband about it. After all, if I got it, we'd have to move away from our hometown again. He would have to find a new job again. We would have to leave my father yet again. And now we had a 3- and 4-year-old. That night, I asked my husband about what he thought about me applying. Almost without hesitation, he said, "Dale gas, give it a try." After a complicated process, I received word that I had been awarded the Ford Fellowship. All I needed now was to get admitted to UT. This was 1974. The number of doctorates being awarded to Latinos nationwide was less than 1%. Thank goodness I didn't know the odds were so great in those days against me succeeding. But if I did get into UT, then we needed to try to get married student housing. My husband needed to find a job in Austin, and I needed a good school for my 3- and 4-year-old babies. I was willing to tackle all of that, but first, I had to be accepted to UT Austin. I had applied and had received a letter saying I was one of many qualified applicants. They would get back to me. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't an acceptance either. So I decided to call the person who had sent me the letter. I called and explained that I needed to know as soon as possible if I had been accepted. She said she would get back to me. A week later, I called her again. A week later, I called her again. Same response each time. Now, you and I know that I was treading on thin ice by this time. In Spanish, estaba molestando. In English, I was being bothersome at best. But I had to know quickly. There was much yet to do. So I called a 5th time. I said, "This is," and she said, "I know who this is." She placed my call on hold, or so she thought. Instead, I was in a conference call between she and the chairman of the department. I didn't breathe. I didn't want them to know that I was still on the call. They talked, and finally the chairman said, "Oh, let her in." She pressed a button, taking him off the call, and said to me, after serious consideration, I thought, I know, I heard every word, she said, "You're in." What if I hadn't made that 5th call? What if I had thought that maybe I wasn't meant to go on and get the doctorate? It never occurred to me. I knew if I could get in, I'd do well because I wanted it so badly. How many times have you thought about giving up because you've let yourself believe that maybe it wasn't meant to be, or maybe I wasn't the right candidate after all, or maybe these programs are for others, but not for me? How might my life have changed if I hadn't made that 5th call? We moved to Austin, into married student housing, found a wonderful Montessori school for my babies, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven because UT had 26 libraries at the time. I swore I would study in each of them, and I did. 3 years later, we moved back home again, now with a doctorate in hand. That doctorate armed and prepared me for a life doing work that matters. 10 years later, I would be named president of the community college, where I first began my own college studies. Later, I would be named president of the University of Texas at Brownsville, a university that we established and that graduated over 35,000 students while I was president. Later, I would help lead the effort to establish the first new university in the United States of the 21st century, UT Rio Grande Valley, with its own medical school, ensuring that never again will a child grow up in the Rio Grande Valley without the benefit that my own parents yearned for, a public, affordable, high-quality university education. And later, I would serve as a member of the board of the Ford Foundation and get to do work that matters on behalf of Ford in Brazil, Peru, Mexico, Vietnam, India, and South Africa. We're given the privilege of a high-quality public education to use for ourselves, of course, but also to do work that matters for others. I know my parents are proud of their legacy. My older brother's a nurse, my younger brother's an engineer with 2 degrees from UT. In 1 generation, we went from carrying a green card and not being able to swim in the public pool to saving lives, designing innovative computer systems, and building a university. But along the way, I would also be sued by the Department of Homeland Security because I would not sign permission for them to build a wall on our campus. I thought often of my father's words about strength and resilience during the year we spent in federal court. But today, there is no 18-foot border wall on our campus. We did work that matters. I don't know why we have to lose people we love to make us stronger. I don't know why we have to suffer this horrific pandemic to learn important lessons about being responsible global citizens or about preparedness, innovation, and collaboration. But I do know that we must never give in or give up. I do know that we will learn from this terrible COVID-19 time. And I do know that tomorrow always brings hope and that the world has never needed each of you graduates more than it does now to survive and thrive. I congratulate you for your own success during this difficult time. And just as my father pronounced those sacred words to me, I now pronounce them to each of you. You too are resilient. You too are powerful. You have survived a worldwide pandemic. Felicidades. There is much yet to do, and we're counting on each of you to do work that matters.